Now will we see the magic?
All right, where's Murray? Okay, who is it?
This is Jesus, kid.
Know then that it is the year 10,191.
Yes, we are bored. We're all bored now.
Hi, good night.
Good night.
Hello, and welcome to Mary vs. the Movies with your host, Mary Jones.
And Dennis Ling.
And welcome to episode 101. Yeah, that's right. We are in triple digits now. Starting off, I guess, our second century is how you would put it, or whatever. I don't know. Look, it's episode 101. I'm excited that's 101.
Yeah.
I can't believe we made it to 101. That's very cool. And we're going to watch a movie.
101 Dalmatians.
Well, you know, I wish we could actually cover that. just you know, because it's 101. But no, I've definitely seen 101 Dalmatians. I probably saw it in a theater. No, instead, we are watching a film that I know almost nothing about. All I know is maybe the poster. And it is called Somewhere in Time. And it stars Christopher Reeve.
Yep.
And I guess it involves time travel.
Yay.
So yes, exactly.
Finally, an American Doctor Who.
You know, if
yeah,
exactly,
see it.
Not Doctor Who, but Superman.
Yeah,
which is kind of the American Doctor Who in a way.
a little bit.
Insofar as, no, he doesn't keep changing his face, but he's an alien who resides in a particular country and is kind of the guy who always saves our bacon, right?
Yeah.
So in the same,
and he's highly identifiable as American.
Right, exactly.
Like in that movie, he's carrying an American flag and all that. Yeah.
Look, truth, justice in the American way.
Yeah.
Just like Doctor Who is, a British police box and the Queen, or King now, and all the rest of it. So yeah, in a way, Superman is the American Doctor Who. I don't know that Superman ever worked for the American version of UNIT, but it's the same. Actually, no. There's a question. What would be the American version of UNIT? Is it like it's like NASA but with like spies, right?
Well, it'd be like X-Files.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, why did we never get an X-Files with Superman? Mulder, Scully investigating Metropolis.
Yeah.
Here's this one reporter.
It'd be like Torchwood.
So we have Christopher Reeve, who, it's not that he didn't like playing Superman. He did it 4 times. But, you get identified with the role. It can be the kiss of death. I don't think it really was with him necessarily. Yeah. He had other roles. He was in other films. He's in a great film, Remains of the Day.
Oh yeah.
He, unfortunately, he had a horse riding accident and was paralyzed for the rest of his life, kind of midway through his career, and which is a tragedy. Yeah. But until then, he was in all kinds of films. Everybody thinks of him as Superman, but he actually had range.
And he seemed really serious about acting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd seen him in a movie called Death Trap.
Yeah, so tell us about Death Trap, because I don't have a whole lot to say about this film. I don't know what. Let me just say, as far as I know, this film it's like something to do with time travel, and the only reason I even know this film exists is because I think at some point they're in like gay 90s America, maybe something that looks pre-World War I, and like that's all I know.
So I don't know anything about The Time Traveler's Wife, that movie,
right?
But this sounds like it's more along those lines than, say, Back to the Future.
But so you saw him in a film called Death Trap.
So I went to Catholic grade school, St. Genevieve's, like for like months. I remember as months. It was probably days, but but like they kept like advertising it. We're going to watch Death Trap, and it stars Superman, and so it stars Christopher Reeve, Michael Caine, and was it Diane Cannon or I don't know. I forget who the woman was. So they would just advertise it, and then
and we're in, like, this is Catholic school. This is the 70s, I guess, or early 80s or whatever. Mm-hmm. And where in the building would you have been watching this? Would they have called you into the auditorium or something?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you just saw the school. It's very small.
Very small. It's a very small school. Yeah.
So the day of, we're all excited. We go in and they say it's been canceled. And we're like, what? Huh? So we end up watching The Cat from Outer Space on like film. I guess they had
Like a 35 millimeter reel.
I don't know, 16. I don't know. It was like this little camera they put up, and they're showing it in a classroom. We're all sitting there, and the only reason I remember it is because the film actually got tangled at one point. And to fix it, they had to play it backwards. So we saw this cat running around backwards, and that was probably the most fun we could possibly have had as kids watching a film.
So why didn't they show you the film Death Trap? Aside from the fact that it's called Death Trap. I mean, first of all,
Well,
let's unpack this for a second. Just because it has Superman in it, they thought, let's show them Death Trap. I mean, look at the title.
See, I'm guessing this is kind of like what happened with Sylvester Stallone and Cobra, where, like they're like, oh, here's this great American hero. He's in this film, and then they see this movie. They're like, oh, my gee.
Well, okay, and also, let's just take for a second that whole, like, Rambo is, Rambo, a hero to children. What?
Yeah. So eventually on cable, I saw Death Trap, and I'm pretty sure what they objected to was not, the violence, because it is about two people killing another person.
So it is about a murder.
Yeah. But
great for children.
Probably what they objected to is that Michael Caine and Christopher Reeve kiss, because they're actually a couple. Twist.
Oh my God.
Type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see that going over well at a Catholic school.
No.
No.
It was a play, and it feels like a play that was made into a movie. People just double-crossing each other to get money or something.
He did another one that was sort of like that. Isn't that Noises Off?
I don't know what that is.
So yeah, I don't have a lot to say about this film. I don't really know what happens in it. I just know it involves time travel. And it's Christopher Reeve. And the poster has him and a woman in what looked like an outfit from, before the First World War. And that's actually, I think, why I ever heard of it was because I have been fascinated with the mid-20th century fascination with the pre-World War I world aesthetic. I don't know what you want to call it. Americana is what you would call it. And it's that whole world of...
So you're a fan of Meet Me in St. Louis, which is set in, 1890s?
1904.
Yeah.
I was raised on movies like Meet Me in St. Louis and The Music Man. And, Oklahoma was another thing I was raised on. And, like that whole kind of... looking back at, Pollyanna was a movie I saw a lot as a kid. Looking back at that time period from about like the late 1880s to about 1914 in America 1917 really, when we got into the First World War.
So like then when they said things were better back then, they actually had a time period in mind, whereas now it's just some kind of vague, back then things were better.
Yeah. But things were not better. This was a terrible time for most people. It was the Gilded Age.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is essentially what people mean by like the Gilded Age into the Progressive Age. And, I'm not going to go on a whole tangent about that here because I don't know if it applies. Although if it turns out that it does for, the film, maybe I will bring it up.
When men were men and presidents had beards.
No, that's the thing. This is when they started to lose their beards.
Oh.
Teddy Roosevelt had a mustache.
Right.
But
Taft had a mustache.
That's
it. It's when presidents had mustaches.
Yes, it is definitely when presidents had mustaches, and it's basically when
The mustache window, they call it.
Yes.
Mustachioed window.
Well, it's basically when every Rankin Bass Christmas and actually Easter special is set. It's like the late Victorian, Edwardian American time period.
When mice are messing with clocks.
Exactly. Lady and the Tramp is set then. There's a lot of movies that came out in like the late 40s into the 50s. Main Street USA, Disney World. Disney loved this because it all was basically when he was growing up. And when I say Disney, I mean literally Walt Disney.
Yeah.
Like he loved setting stuff in this time period. I don't know to what extent this movie goes back to that, but the poster evokes it. I don't know where in time it starts. I don't know what the time traveling mechanism is. I just know that there's time travel involved, and I wonder if the time traveler's wife might be a good analogy.
I don't know. I'm just
either.
guessing because
Yeah.
I know nothing about this. So we've talked about just about everything but this movie.
Because I don't know what happens in this film. I don't know what.
You do think it's a romantic thing?
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be romantic because it's like him and a woman on the cover.
Do you think it's a comedy at all?
I think it's a romance.
I feel like at this point they didn't do romantic comedy. Like it was not a lot. It was like they just.
Well, they existed. I mean, Arthur came out the same time period.
Yeah, I'm just saying it just like romantic comedies as we know them like weren't a thing back then. Like it was.
I think they were a little different. Yeah, because this is, 1981, which means it was probably written in the late 70s, which means it would have been filmed probably in 1980. Yeah, I think the tone will be different than when we think of romantic comedies because, of course, I grew up in the 90s, so my thought of romantic comedies is usually like, well, Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan are going to get together somehow. Yeah, I don't know.
I just find, like, I feel like the early 80s, like, there was a lot of, like, they weren't afraid to just do just straight drama and that's it.
True.
And
yeah.
I have a feeling that's what this is going to be.
Well, maybe it will be. I mean, I think it's what we'll call soft science fiction. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So do you think he gets the girl at the end?
Oh, now that's actually a really good question. Is this going to have like a bittersweet ending? Is this going to be sad? I don't know.
Do they end up on a train going through time?
A train going through time? Why a train?
Like the Back to the Future 3 ending.
You think it's going to be like Back to the Future
Jules
3?
And Vern, their
oh my
kids.
God. Look, Back to the Future 3 is obviously the weakest of that trilogy. I still kind of like it, though.
I thought the second one was the weakest.
No, the second one, the first half of the second one is really grating. But once they get back to alternate 1985, that movie rocks. I love Back to the Future 2. Once they go back to alternate 1985 and you have like Biff Tannen, who is Donald Trump. Like everything from that onward is great. When they basically redo the first film, but from a different like point of view, and they're doing like that stuff's great. All the stuff set in the future sucks. Back to the Future 2 is an uneven film, but I would watch that any day of the week. And I would watch the third film too. I mean,
you'll watch any of them.
Yeah, I do. I really do love Back to the Future.
Yeah. So
I love time travel films. I really do. I've always been fascinated by time travel. On our other podcast, our Patreon podcast, we just watched Kaneki Yankee and King Arthur's Court a couple months ago, and that's like an early time travel story, and I thought it was great. I've always been into time travel as a plot. Whether it's like on Star Trek, whether it's Back to the Future, whether it's, boy, it's going to kill me not remembering the name of that movie with Malcolm McDowell playing H.G. Wells, but but there you go, H.G. Wells, The Time Machine. I love time travel as a story.
Yeah.
Whether it's that, whether it's even X-Files, X-Men, Days of Future Past. Days of Future Past was great.
You know what? I forget all about it.
Oh my God, that's like one of the good ones.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
Point is, I like time travel, so I'm assuming I'm going to enjoy this film.
Okay.
So shall we go and find out what this film is actually about?
Sure, why not? So, penny for your thoughts?
No! You're a monster! Oh, God!
It was 1979, the year you were born.
Look, don't put this on me. It's not my fault. Oh, man. Okay, I was not expecting that.
Yeah.
So, this movie, huh? What if you were really good at cosplay? Like really good. Yeah. My sister wishes she was this good at cosplay. I gotta say, when the movie started,
Yep.
and I saw the name Richard Matheson
Yeah.
was the writer, did I let out a little yelp?
You did.
I did.
And I was like, who's that?
All right, Dennis, let me tell you about Richard Matheson. Okay.
By the way, the lead guy is named Richard. Right away you hear them complimenting Richard on his fantastic play.
If you can't insert yourself into a story, why even be a writer? Okay, so Richard Matheson, for those who don't know, he is a science fiction writer, American. He died about 10 years ago, and he's sort of not as known as he should be, even though you know stories of his. Let's see. He wrote Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, the most famous Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, he used to write for Galaxy Magazine, which was the sci-fi thing of the 50s and the 60s, and a lot of those stories went on to be used in Twilight Zone.
And he wrote a bunch of Twilight Zone episodes, so that's probably like what a lot of people might know him for without knowing who he is. But everybody knows Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is the gremlin on the airplane wing, which has been done several times. There's the original with William Shatner. There is the John Lithgow version in the Twilight Zone film. And, of course, there is the Bart Simpson version in one of the Treehouse of Horrors, which I've seen many times. But he also wrote other episodes of The Twilight Zone. He wrote the original...
I think that version's kind of based on the movie version, too.
Well, at some point, we're going to watch the Twilight Zone film, because I've never seen it. Although I grew up... I would catch the Twilight Zone in reruns and stuff, and my mom was a big fan. So he wrote that. He wrote the original novel that became I Am Legend, which has been done several times. 1950s version with Vincent Price, Last Man on Earth. The Omega Man with Charlton Heston, and of course I Am Legend with Will Smith. But it kind of invented the zombie as we know it. It was a huge inspiration for Night of the Living Dead. Matheson wrote all of the Roger Corman Edgar Allan Poe adaptations, so like The Raven, Pit and the Pendulum, all that stuff. The ones with the good ones. Yeah. Oh my God, I love those movies.
Yeah, they're great.
Roger Corman still alive. He's like 97 or something.
Sheesh.
Yeah. No. Roger Corman, super important guy. We've brought him up before on here because he produced Rock and Roll High School.
He wrote Duel.
Which is Spielberg's first full length, although it was a TV movie. Oh, you know where else he shows up? He shows up in Godfather Part 2. He is one of the senators.
Oh, okay.
In the Senate hearing. Yeah. He's one of the senators. Roger Corman is one of the senators. I don't know who the main guy is, the bald guy talking. I forget who that actor is. Yeah. But the other guys who are sitting there are people that Coppola worked with and got his break working with. So
that's cool.
Which is really neat, right?
Yeah.
So Matheson, you could actually see him in a film there. And he also is, I guess, in this movie at one point.
Right.
He's the guy who criticizes Christopher Reeve's shaving. If you're listening to this, you've probably seen at least one thing that Matheson has written. So anyway, yes, this movie. This is one of those films that has like a time loop.
Yeah.
But it's not a time loop that I was quite expecting, and I rather enjoyed it. Also, this is a real bummer of a movie. So Richard Collier is a young playwright living in Chicago. The film opens actually in 1972. He just had a play put on, and this is the after party, and everyone's just like, man, you did an amazing job.
Yeah, William H. Macy's there.
Oh my God. So, okay, when we were watching the credits, and they're like, yeah, William H. Macy, like W.H. Macy is one of the critics, and I'm just like, what are they talking about? And then we like started the film over again.
Also, it says George Wendt, and we were watching for both of them.
Never saw George Wendt. Apparently his scenes were cut.
Yeah.
I was a little disappointed. Tim Kaczmarek does show up, because both George Wendt and Tim Kaczmarek were both in My Bodyguard, which was also filmed in Chicago around the same time period. So people who were in Second City. Yeah.
And apparently there's a ton of Second City people in this because it was filmed out near Chicago.
Chicago and Mackinac Island in upstate Michigan.
Upstate Michigan, is that upstate like Glove, upstate?
It's in the middle between the two. It's an island between the two.
Oh.
Yeah. Do you know about Mackinac Island?
No.
Oh, we will get to Mackinac Island in talking about this film.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, it's actually kind of relevant. But the opening of the film is supposed to be 1972, and Richard has had his play put on. Richard, of course, is Christopher Reeve. And everybody's just like, yeah, you did this great job. You might go to Broadway. I've been told I might go to Broadway. This is great. And this old woman breezes right into the cast party, which, first of all, I appreciate, her guts of I'm just going to walk in on this thing.
Yeah, she's dressed all in black. It's great.
Oh, she's just like this gothic apparition,
I know.
like walking into this group of young people in like 1972, and they're all just listening to like rock music and stuff, and she just glides in like Mrs. Havisham or something, hands him a pocket watch and says, come back to me, and then just disappears. And she's not an apparition. She is actually a person, but then just like leaves. And of course, he's haunted by like 8 years later, 1980. And he is a successful playwright, lives in Chicago. He's working on whatever his next play is, and he just doesn't know what he's doing, and decides to go for a drive. And he goes on a long drive, I got to tell you, because he went from Chicago to Mackinac Island. So, okay, folks, Mackinac Island. If you can picture Michigan with, as Dennis said, the mitten and the devil horns.
Yeah.
Okay. So Mackinac Island sits, I guess it's technically in Lake Huron, but it's kind of where Michigan and Huron meet. All
Yeah,
right?
it's like right at the tip there.
It's right at the very tip. It's a resort town. There's no cars allowed on it.
So he was not driving an amphicar, by the way.
No, he was not. And they had to get special permission to drive a car on the island because otherwise you're never supposed to drive a car on Mackinac Island. If I remember correctly, I might be wrong, but I feel like this is an island which, because it is a resort town where there's no cars, everything is horse carriages, they have something called the Epona Festival. This is only interesting to me. Epona is the ancient Gaulish horse goddess.
Yeah.
They have a festival in honor of the goddess Epona, this ancient Celtic goddess, because it is an island, like the only place in America where you can't have cars. You have to ride a horse. So I find it fascinating that there's like this one island right on the border with Canada where they have a festival in honor of a Celtic goddess. So he ends up driving, and like they don't tell you it's Mackinac Island, but because in reality you wouldn't be able to be driving your car there. But also, that's a very long trip to take. Like we take a lot of long road trips, right?
Yeah.
We've driven to Chicago. We've driven into the bottom part of Michigan. Like, it's a long drive. I mean, I get it. He's got writer's block. I've done that. I've had like times where I'm just like super depressed and I'm like, I'm just going to drive for a long time and end up, I don't know where. And one time I ended up at a lake and I'm still not entirely sure where that lake was, but that's essentially what he does. And so it's a resort town. And that's the other thing I want to talk about for a second. When people think about the Great Lakes, I don't think people know how big those things are. The idea that these are resort towns on lakes. Now, I mean, yeah, you can do like your Lake Champlain, your Lake George, and yeah, that's fine. And it's very picturesque up there. We've been there. It's very nice. We're both from the East Coast. If you live on the East Coast and you want to go on vacation for a week, you go to the shore, right? You go down the shore. And for us, that means we usually go to New Jersey. Other people might go to the Outer Banks. They might go to Maryland or Delaware. Some people, might go down to Myrtle Beach, although that's a long haul. I don't know why I'd go all the way to Myrtle Beach. But so I always think to myself, like, if you live in like the Midwest, where in the world do you go on vacation? Like, are you just like rich enough that you get on a plane and go somewhere? I don't know. Well, now there's a question, I know people listening to us, they live in Iowa, or Nebraska. And I would love to know how they go on vacation, because to me, like I've driven in those states and I'm sure there are nice places to go, but I always think like you want to go on vacation, you want to go to a beach. Where in the world do you go? Well, here's the thing. The American Great Lakes, they're basically like inland seas. They're not as big as the Mediterranean, but they're really big, right? You can have resort towns just like New Jersey. I don't know how many of them are still there. And in fact, there's kind of an interesting thing in this film where in 1980, they're a bit deserted and empty in a way that they aren't in 1912.
Right.
So I don't know what the condition of resort towns along the Great Lakes are in 2023, much less 1980. But in 1912, it would be like going to Atlantic City. But yeah, so he goes off to... It's not shabby exactly, but it's definitely not the shining jewel that it once was. It's called the Grand Hotel. Again, it's all on Mackinac Island, and it's a bit like going to Cape May, but like Cape May in the 80s. When I was a kid, my mom would take us to a town in New Jersey called Cape May, and this is all the way at the very bottom of the state.
You can see Delaware from it.
You can, actually, especially at night. It's kind of cool if you're there at the edge of Cape May at night and you look out to the south and you see lights off in the distance, and it took me a while to I was in my 40s when I realized I was looking at Delaware.
Yeah.
That's how far south you are, and you can actually see over to Lewis. Cape May is kind of an unusual town because they were able to preserve all of this Victorian architecture, and nowadays it's a very pricey place to go and everything is very built and like preserved and whatnot. But in the 80s, things were not as run down as they were in the 70s. In the 70s, you could have bought any of those buildings like for a song. In the 80s, not quite as much.
Which apparently was kind of the same thing as Telluride
Sure.
in Colorado.
Yeah.
I remember when my aunt and uncle, they used to live there. and they had kind of gotten in just as it became famous, and then it got its own, and it had its own film festival and all that. But
Yeah. So watching this film kind of reminded me of going to Cape May in the 80s.
and it has a big Congress Hotel. Or-
Congress Hall.
yeah,
Yeah, it's this big old hotel that was built in like the 1870s, I think.
yeah. It's not quite as fancy looking as the Grand Hotel.
No, the Grand Hotel in this film is very fancy looking. Well, no, here's the thing. In 1980, like that version of it doesn't look quite as fancy. Part of the thing in this film is when he goes there in 1980, everything is a bit more modern. It's not as ornate. The lampposts, like all the walls are kind of bare. You don't have the fireplaces in every room. You don't have pictures with ornate frames on them. You don't have like the big mirrors. You don't have plants everywhere. Everything's kind of stripped down in a way that I remember as a kid in the 80s that a lot of places were, and frankly they still are. And it makes a nice contrast from when he goes back to 1912, and then all of a sudden you have that whole end of the Gilded Age, end of the, I guess they would call it Edwardian or whatever, where everything is very almost overstuffed in a way that I happen to like.
Well, we should get into like why he goes back in time.
Oh, I know, but yeah, but I like the contrast.
Yeah.
Okay, so why he goes back in time? So he goes to this hotel, and he has this writer's block, and he goes and he's wandering around, and he's just trying to find. He starts talking to this attendant. It feels weird calling him a bellhop, but he is a bellhop.
Albert is his name?
Arthur.
Okay, yeah.
Played by Bill Irwin, who is a character actor that you have definitely seen in other things.
Huh.
Seinfeld, I think, is probably what he's best known. He had a role in Seinfeld, but he was in a lot of stuff, especially in like the 80s and 90s. He's just like this character actor. He plays Arthur the bellhop, who grew up at this hotel. Richard kind of befriends him and starts talking to him a lot.
Yeah, it's just so foreshadowing type stuff. Like, yeah, I used to play with a ball. I always got yelled at by my dad. And you're like, yeah, I'm gonna be seeing that soon.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. No. Once you know that this is a time travel story, he's just like, yeah, I was a child here. It's just like, okay. Not subtle, but that's all right.
Yeah.
And so he can't sleep. He's wandering around. He can't work on his play. He goes into a little section of the hotel that's like a little museum, the history of the hotel. And he sees a portrait
of Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman.
No, well, yeah. I mean,
It's her.
it is her. I'll give you that. It's Jane Seymour.
Yeah.
And she's great in this.
Yeah.
She really is.
She's stunning.
Yeah, she is stunning in this. I agree. Yeah, so he sees this portrait of what's her name? Elise McKenna.
Yeah.
Elise McKenna, was an actress in 1912 who stayed at the hotel and did a play in, one of the outbuildings. And he is just enraptured with her. He's just absolutely struck by this portrait, and he's not entirely sure why. And he starts researching this woman. Like, he has to find out who this woman is in this portrait.
Yeah, he goes to Meg Ryan's library.
Apparently Meg Ryan is in the background. Yes. And again, it's one of these things where like there are all these people who were actors in Chicago at the time who show up in like the background of the film. So he goes to the local library and he's doing all this research, and I kept thinking as I was watching this, like, oh my God, remember how hard research used to be? Like, it was such a pain. Like I was like at the tail end of when you had to use card catalogs.
Yeah.
And microfiche. Yeah. I mean, you couldn't just like type a few keywords into Google. You had to go and like just sift through newspapers and magazines and books and stuff. What a pain that is. I mean, sure, it's a fun way to spend an afternoon, but if you're actually trying to do research on something, look, there's a lot that I don't like about the modern world. There's a lot that's horrifying about the modern world. Search engines, though, they're fantastic.
Or at least they were.
Well, yeah, actually, that's true. Google's terrible now. And you can't get anything because everything's been locked up in JSTOR and EBSCOhost and all that stuff. So actually, now that I'm thinking about it, research is bad again. It was pretty good like 20 years ago
Yeah.
in like 2003, but now it's just awful. So he does research and he finds out that the portrait is of this Elise McKenna, and she was an actress, and he finds a book about her, and so he hunts down the woman who wrote the book about her, who we actually saw earlier in the film when the old woman, who of course actually, Elise McKenna as an old woman. Earlier in the film, we actually see this other woman who was her kind of biographer and assistant. And so he goes and searches for this writer and, talks to her, and it's just like...
Finds out that she died that night.
Yes, that this Elise McKenna died the night that she gave him the watch at his play premiere. And so he is all haunted by the story of this Elise McKenna.
Also, she has this. She has a model of the Grand Hotel
in her old room
that plays this song.
Right, a piece of music that he is obsessed with.
Yeah,
and he doesn't know why he's obsessed with it, but he is. It's a variation on Rachmaninoff, which actually was specifically composed for this film.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, and I wanted to bring this up, I had heard of this film, and I didn't know I heard this film. Do you want to know why I've heard of this film?
Why?
When I was a child, I was really into music boxes from the San Francisco Music Box Company, which was... yeah, I heard that laugh. I heard you snort.
We were just making fun of a friend of mine who had very odd taste for a 9th grader.
Okay, but this is perfectly normal for like 8-year-old girls.
All
Okay,
right.
because this is music boxes and they all play pretty music with little horses, as the figurine or whatever. All of my girl cousins were into this too. We all liked music boxes. It was a very normal thing. They had a store at the King of Prussia Mall in the 80s and early 90s. And I would just remember a bunch of different music boxes that had the theme to Somewhere in Time. And I would play it, and I had no idea what I was listening to.
The movie did terrible, but the soundtrack did great.
Well, it's a beautiful piece of music.
Yeah.
It's all like kind of high romantic classical music.
People have played it at weddings, that kind of thing. Yeah. And the piece that it's a variation on actually came out in 1934. He would know it. Of course, she wouldn't because it didn't exist. So
right.
it's kind of a fun time loop thing there, too, which they don't really bring up in the film. But
so he becomes obsessed with this woman. And he doesn't know any way to, he can't get in touch with her. She died 8 years before.
Now, she was reading a book on time travel.
It reminds me a little bit of Donnie Darko. This older woman was obsessed with this idea of time travel and was reading a book by a guy who was Richard's professor in college. Okay, so these things all kind of are looping back in on each other.
Yeah.
So he goes and hunts down his old professor and he says, look, I was a student of yours, and of course the guy doesn't remember him because, let's face it, teachers don't remember you. I love that. Every time you're like, oh, I should go back and check out my old school. It's like, look, man, nobody's going to remember you. Any teacher who's just like, oh, yeah, no, they don't. Come on, man. You have to have really stood out, and either that's very good or very bad, especially in college. Yeah, forget it. But so he goes and finds this old professor, and it says, I want to ask you, about time travel and all this stuff that you wrote about. And the guy says, well, I think I did it once. And essentially what he did was like a self-hypnosis thing. The conditions are you have to get rid of everything that would remind you of your actual time period, right? So change your clothes, change the furniture in your room, cut off contact with whatever the outside world is, get rid of everything that could possibly remind you that you're not living in the year 1980. Do whatever you can to evoke the year that you are trying to get yourself into. And essentially you kind of put yourself under hypnosis. So Richard's just like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to try it. I'm going to do it. So he goes back into the town and he goes and buys, this antique suit.
Gets money, coins.
He buys old coins from a coin shop and tries to, he tries to get rid of everything in the room that he can get rid of. It sticks everything in the closet so that nothing that would remind him too obviously of living in 1980. He cuts his hair. That suit is terrible, by the way. Oh my God. It's like a brown pinstripe suit. And he ends up looking like Michael Crawford in Hello, Dolly. It is not a good look. And I love the fact that later on, everybody makes fun of him for this suit because it's a bad suit.
But he's listening to a tape of himself telling him you are in your...
1912.
Yeah.
He decides, I'm going to go back to June 27th, 1912. Because I know that this Elise McKenna was at the hotel in 1912, and if I can just go back there, I can meet her, and like I can make all of this make sense. Why am I obsessed with all this stuff? You know, if I can just get back there. And the fact that, you know, he puts this sort of hypnotic suggestion onto a tape, and he's trying to lay there and just like essentially meditate himself into the past, and it doesn't work. I love that. It's like it's not working, and because deep down I think he doesn't really believe it.
Right.
Until he finds an old ledger from 1912 where he can find his own signature. Like, so he convinces Arthur. He goes to Arthur. He says, "Look, I see you have like old ledgers in the museum. Do you have any others elsewhere?" He's like, "Yeah, up in the attic. We've got all kinds of stuff." So he goes up in the attic and he finds one from 1912, and he's running through, and there's his name, and it's his signature and everything. And
it says the name 412. The room number is 412.
No, 416.
Or 416?
Yeah,
oh,
I'm pretty sure it's 416.
Okay, yeah.
Well,
we'll pretend it's 416.
Will we? Because I'm pretty sure I'm right.
Okay.
The point is, he sees that, yes, I definitely was there. I absolutely was there. I have proof that I was there. Okay, this will definitely work.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, until he had something that kind of grounded him into being able to see that, like, yeah, this definitely happened to me, he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So he goes back to the room and he starts playing the tape again. And I think just the fact that he has this tape playing doesn't work. Because again, you're listening to yourself and you're listening to a recording, and it's still reminding you that you're living in the present.
Yeah.
So it's not until he gets rid of the tape recorder and he just essentially falls asleep. He wakes up in 1912. It's a little bit like a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. And he wakes up and he's in 1912. And unfortunately, he's in the wrong room. And he has to sneak out before a very jealous husband finds him. Christopher Reeve is very funny, just trying to hide from these people. The rest of the film is him trying to insinuate himself into Elise's life.
A little stalkery.
Oh, no, he's a total creep.
Yeah.
He's absolutely a creep in this.
Like, this is where he gets a little bit like, say, Tootsie or Mrs. Doubtfire. Like...
Look, the 80s are not good when it comes to this type of thing. I mean, though there's something very of the time in what he's doing. Because
he's basically like I like you, and that's all he has to offer. Like, he's just like, I like you, and she's like, so when they first meet, she says, "Is it you?" He's like, "Yeah." It's like he doesn't even know what he's saying. But
well, and the story itself kind of implies that they're fated to be together, right? They never spell it out. You don't meet any sort of demigod that says you're supposed to be together, but they're obviously supposed to be. So that when they first meet, she is inexplicably attracted to him. He's inexplicably attracted to her picture. All this stuff, but when he is in 1912 and he's trying to like get in with her, it's a bit stalkery. You kind of see her discomfort, but at the same time, it's like because they're fated to be together, like that's overcome.
Plus, she's in a bad situation, anyways.
Yeah, that's the thing. She has a manager who's got a real Svengali sort of feel to him. He's played by Christopher Plummer, who's great.
Yeah.
He's so good at being a villain.
Yeah.
He has a sort of oiliness to him.
Yeah.
That works really well.
But he's so articulate.
For a Canadian, he's very European.
Yeah.
He is her manager, and he, of course, does not want her falling for this guy. Who is this weirdo from, dressed in a bad suit that's like 10, 15 years out of date and trying to like get with you. And I do like that the film says, look, he's not like into her sexually. He has no actual interest in her in that way. He's purely like a Colonel Tom Parker situation.
Yeah.
This girl is going to be a star. I'm going to make her a star. And dude, you are getting in the way of that. It's a different type of abusive relationship.
Yeah.
But at least there's no sex involved. He is like kind of the main antagonist because he's constantly trying to keep them apart. And to be honest, you gotta admit, he's got a point. Where is this dude coming from?
Yeah.
This guy that nobody knows, who claims to be a playwright, that nobody's ever seen any of his plays.
Dressed in a suit that he never changes.
Yeah.
For like 3 days.
As you said, he's got to smell terrible.
I know. Later, he's in a stable.
By the time you get to the end of the film and he's just drenched in sweat, and it's 1980, like, it's, oh my God, so disgusting. Like, he dies of a broken heart. Spoiler alert. But I think he just dies of the stench. There's a romance in this film, but at the same time, it's kind of weird and slight.
Like, eventually, they go for a walk.
Yeah.
And the walk is a montage Like, we don't hear what they're saying. We see them talking to each other. And it reminded me of RRR,
Okay.
which takes place pretty much the same year.
That's
around the same time.
I was going to say RRR, I think, builds up the relationship better.
Oh, yeah. Well, RRR, takes its time to do everything.
That's true.
And it throws everything in kitchen sink in. But in this case, it's kind of weird that, like, suddenly it's just a montage. We don't know why she's falling in love with him. But
The only reason they're really drawn to each other is that fate has decided that they should be drawn to each other. They're only together for like 3 days. He unintentionally disrupts a performance that she gives by like basically getting into her head.
yeah.
And Christopher Plummer freaks out and it's just like, this dude's got to be gotten rid of. He has his henchmen tie him up and, put him in the stables.
Because they're taking the train to go to Denver.
Right. They're going to go on tour.
Yeah.
So he's like, all right, I got to get this guy out of the way so that I can get her out of this hotel and keep going. That's how they're broken up, separated. But of course, because they're supposed to be drawn together, she gets free of this dude. They're finally able to come together. And then, next thing we know, they're in her hotel room and they finally get to sleep together. And it's the next morning. And this is all very fast.
Yeah.
A lot of this film is just him trying to get back in time and just get her to know who he is.
Yeah, we've spent so much time talking about the process because it really took a long time for him just to get there.
It really does. Most of this film is him just trying to get into the past and trying to get her, even talk to her one time.
And for me, one of the most fascinating scenes is there's a scene where he's getting a room. One of the ways he got back there is because he knows he's in room 416, as Mary says, supposedly.
Look, go and rewatch this movie. I'm telling you, it's 416.
So he gets a room, and they hand him a room key, and it says 420. And you could see that the panic on his face. He's like, this isn't right. I feel like what's showing, it's like his connection to this is so tenuous. It's just like his will that's holding him there. This one aspect of his cosplay outfit is wrong. He's wearing Nike sneakers or something. It's like this one thing that almost like forces him out, and then the other guy says, "Oh no, we booked that room here. It's 416," as Mary Jones says. Which I thought was a really weird line to put into the movie, but
So anyway, they finally come together. And I assume come together.
Yeah.
And because it is, it is the movies.
Yeah.
And it cuts right to the next morning. Again, it's the 1980s, but we don't get like a full-on hardcore scene in the way that you would get in other films. This is all very PG.
Yeah, a lot of Vaseline on the lens type stuff.
Dude, there's so much Vaseline in this thing that this movie uses so much Vaseline, you would think it was on the Logo Network. Dennis, that's a Drag Race joke.
I don't know what the Logo Network is.
Oh my God. Wow.
watch
You are
TV.
not an ally.
No.
There's a lot of Vaseline on the lenses in this. I mean, and I think it is mostly kept to the 1912 era stuff. So yeah, next thing you know, it's the next morning and they're, basically doing the thing where people are kind of hanging out, they're just kind of talking about like, oh, we'll do this.
It has this sci-fi element for the first 40 minutes of the movie.
Yeah.
And then it turns
almost an hour, I'd say.
Yeah. And then it turns into this, people are in love. There's all these things in the way that are trying to keep them apart. And then they finally find each other and they, and they have sex. And then now, we have another half hour of romance or something. And then things are going to go wrong. But then this scene happens.
Yeah, this was really surprising. So you just figure, well, we're kind of nearing the end of the film. So what happens now, right? Does he stay in 1912? They're like, yes, we're in this relationship. This is awesome. This is the rest of our lives.
And she says, you're gonna marry me, of course. And he's like, sure.
Sure, I'll marry you. Why not? I mean, that's what I'm here for. And she starts making fun of that terrible brown suit. And he's like, no, this suit's great. I have, special pockets where I can put all of my money. And he pulls out a penny. But oh no, the penny's from 1979.
Yeah, man.
And the moment he looks at it, his entire world falls apart. He is being pulled back through time. And you see her, Jane Seymour, just screaming.
Yeah.
Because I guess she just sees him like being pulled into a vortex or something. And next thing you know, he wakes up in a shabby hotel room in 1980, drenched in sweat, still in that terrible brown suit. I don't think he utters another word for the rest of the film.
No.
He goes catatonic, apparently spends a week in this room, in this suit, wasting away. He doesn't eat, he doesn't drink, he doesn't do anything. He is just, his eyes are just completely like pink. He's obviously just like been bawling his eyes out. And that's it. He's done for. To the point where Arthur starts banging on his door like, hey, are you still in this room? You haven't, like, first of all, I realize this is a film. I gotta think at some point room service would have knocked on his door and noticed this dude has not been moving for like a couple of days. The stench. Just think about that. This dude, again, drenched in sweat when he wakes up in 1980.
He slept in a stable.
This guy has to smell horrible. Yeah. There's no way that they didn't notice that this dude was just wasting away in a room. But all right, fine.
He's Superman.
Yeah, he's super stinky man. That's terrible. Anyway, doctor's just like, this guy hasn't eaten for a week and his heart's not beating right and his blood pressure is dropping. I think, we got to call an ambulance. I think we're going to lose him. Next thing you know, he is having an out-of-body experience. And Richard is just like sailing out of the room. And there in the light is Elise waiting for him. Because, of course, she died 8 years before. And that's it. That's the end of the film.
Yeah. So when Christopher Reeve had his accident, his horse accident in 1995, so when he had his horse accident and he was in the hospital, he actually had an out-of-body experience, he said.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So like the end of the film.
Mm-hmm.
They are only able to be reunited because he decides to starve himself for a week and die.
But the way it's done, it just feels like so sudden. Like even though you're like an hour and a half into this film and you're like, well, where did this go now? And then suddenly it just ends. It's like, what? It's really effective and it's a real downer.
Yeah, man. I did not expect this to be the ending. Because so often, here's the thing. So often you'll watch a movie, and if this was made today, they would come up with some sort of, hey, here's how we saved it.
Yeah.
Here's how we made everything better. I do respect that this film's just like, no, the only way that this could be made better is he dies.
It felt like a long Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, it's definitely a long Twilight Zone.
Like it definitely has that kind of like, I know it's not hard sci-fi the way you're thinking, but it is like this is how a sci-fi thing would end.
No. I think comparing it to the Twilight Zone is completely appropriate. Yeah, it's that type of sci-fi.
It's like a paradox correcting itself type of thing.
Yeah. Like this is the only way that the universe will let these two people be together because he did a thing he wasn't supposed to do.
Speaking of paradoxes, where does that watch come from?
Well, yeah, because here's the thing. So the film starts with she gives him a watch.
Yeah.
And then he goes back in time with the watch and he gives her the watch.
Yeah.
Which then she's going to give him.
She doesn't know. So this is a nice watch. Where'd this come from?
And he's like, well, you gave it to me. Yeah. In 1972.
Well, he didn't say
well,
he
doesn't
said
explain
someone
that.
gave it to me.
Someone gave it to him. So yeah, this watch just exists within a time loop.
Yeah.
I do like paradoxes like that. That is fun. It feels weird to say anything in this movie is fun when you come to that kind of an ending. Yeah. It's like, weird because like it's not that the film is lighthearted otherwise, although there's a lot of bits in it that are really kind of like funny or moving or I don't know, like it's very much a melodrama, I guess.
Oh yeah, which I think is what critics objected to. That it was just overly melodramatic. Like there's a lot of scenes of just him staring.
Yeah.
Like him staring at like her picture or him staring at like an object.
Yeah.
Like,
but I don't think it's actually a bad movie at all. It's nicely shot. There's some nice cinematography in it. There's a lot of nice camera work in it. They use that, what do they call it? The diopter lens. Is that what it's called?
Oh yeah, diopter split
lens. Yeah, they use that at one point, which is really cool. Like there's a lot of nice framing in it and dissolves and whatnot.
So initially it was supposed to come out on a limited release, but then they like showed it to test audiences and they loved it. And so we'll just do a wide release. Everybody's going to love this thing because it's Superman. He's in love with this hot lady who's going to be Dr. Quinn. Right around when the movie is going to come out, suddenly there's a actors strike.
Yeah.
And so they're not allowed to promote the film.
Well, it's not that they're not allowed, but they didn't want to break.
Yeah. And a wide release, critics just hated it. they can't promote it. So, nobody knows to watch it. There's
Well,
so many things working against it.
Yeah, and I think they were lucky that because it's 1980 and VHS tapes are going to come around and cable is going to get into people's houses, I think that's why it does have like more of a cult following now.
Yeah.
It's better regarded now than it was in 1980.
Like at the time, he's famous for being Superman, and he basically Padme's out.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is kind of how he dies, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, look, I've had some bad breakups. I've never done this. When I die, let me put it this way. When I die, if I die before you, hopefully not. I'm younger than you.
I hope you don't have like a penny from like 2062 or something.
Oh, no.
No, that's right. I convinced myself to come back in time for you.
Why would it come back to 2023? This year sucks. I don't want to come back to this time period. Oh, my God, no.
Maybe things are really bad then.
Oh, no.
Like lava monsters or something.
Hey, I was thinking, so the time period that they go back to, okay, so it's like a 68-year difference from 1980 to 1912.
Yeah.
The difference between 1980 and 1912 is huge,
Yeah.
admittedly. We sit there and we do the math. I guess you said the difference between now, 2023, and 68 years ago is 1955.
Yeah. Back to the Future time.
We did mention Back to the Future in the pre-show.
Yeah.
And two, it's really weird to think that way because 1955, it is a very different world from now, admittedly. But like my mom was alive, she was 10. It's not as strange looking from now to 1955 than from 1980 to 1912. And it's weird to think like, oh, this is the same distance in time. And yet 1955 does not feel as foreign. And I mean, part of that is also because, I'm in my 40s and, I have an easier connection to that time period. But, when you hear somebody was born in, 1905, when I was a kid, if you heard that seemed like an unfathomably ancient.
Yeah.
Whereas now, if you hear that somebody was born in the 50s, you go, oh, okay, they were born in the 50s, whatever. And I mean, if I was, 16, I would think they were unfathomably ancient. But so I'm just kind of intrigued at how time is this kind of constantly moving thing, and our sense of what is ancient and what is not is constantly going to change.
There's people that we know that could tell us what 1955 was like.
Yeah, my mom.
Whereas in 1980, there's people. Lillian Gish was around.
That's true. That's a good point.
You could have people that would talk about the Titanic. That thing.
Yeah, isn't that funny to think that in 1980? That world wasn't as far back as we think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you kind of forget that now. It just reminds you that time is this thing that never stops. And all of a sudden, you're decades older than you realize you are. I say as my back hurts from gardening. Yeah. The other thing that struck me watching this, I brought up going to Cape May as a kid. There is something about going to certain resort towns that it feels like time travel.
Well, that's the thing about this movie. I think that's the reason why we kind of like it.
Yeah.
Because, it's time travel, but it's kind of describing this thing where you go to an old place and everything around you is old. It kind of casts such a spell that you feel like, if I just thought it, I'd be there.
Yes, exactly. There was a night you and I were in Cape May for an anniversary. I think it was our 10th anniversary or something like that. And I remember us walking through the town after dark. And so you have all these Victorian buildings and, and everything is kind of lit in that kind of the gloaming time of day. And it did have that feel of, you could easily just picture if our clothes were slightly different. And, this is a town where you do have, carriage rides and whatnot. And you could easily fool yourself into thinking it was 1912 or whatever. And there is something about going down the shore, which is an inherently nostalgic thing, especially if you are from certain places like Philadelphia or whatever.
Oh, we follow this one group. It's old pictures of Ocean City.
This is a thing on Facebook.
And we go to Ocean City a lot in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Ocean City, New Jersey, not Maryland.
No, I'm
or
not gonna
Delaware.
haul all the way down to Maryland. Come on, man.
Wherever it is.
Yeah.
But so it has these pictures of the boardwalk that we go to all the time. The shops all change, but because it's on the boardwalk and because it's on the shoreline, like the lots that the shops are on never change. Like they never change their shape, but it's usually the same building. So every picture looks exactly the same. Like
Names of the stores will change, and what the stores are might change, but the buildings don't usually change. Not often.
it just looks like people are hired to dress differently on the boardwalk. Like sometimes they have hoop skirts. Sometimes it's like red-faced people in the 50s all look like they're just about to have a heart attack. And
sometimes it's girls with very teased hair, and the collars are off the shoulder, and it's 1985, and it's funny how there are certain places that evoke that sense of I do feel almost like I'm time traveling, or I feel like I'm out of time.
But maybe only older people feel that.
I think that's true. When you're young, you don't feel this. You can't feel this. It's impossible. This is purely a thing that happens to people as they age.
Yeah. Sorry, any younger people listening to this. You won't get this.
Why would a younger person listen to this?
I know.
Oh, come on, man. No young person's going to put themselves through listening to us. Come on.
I know.
I think I like this film, but it's also because I'm projecting my own sort of things onto it.
Richard Matheson wrote it because he was in a hotel and he saw a picture of Maude Adams, who was an actress around the same time period. Basically, he had the same experiences, like, man, like if only I could meet her, that kind of thing. And Elise is basically the exact same character. So Maude had a manager, Charles Frohman, who like discovered her at 16 and then like raised her up, and she made $1 million a year back then.
Yeah.
she was cast as Peter Pan, and then like she actually was like a recluse for most of her life, and so like he was kind of writing up a story about why that was or something.
Yeah, so this is basically Richard Matheson getting really weird about Maude Adams.
Yeah. So Charles Frohman, actually, he died in the Lusitania.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So that was 1915.
Wait, you just brought up the Lusitania.
Yeah.
Should we bring up the Titanic?
We should bring up the movie Titanic, which borrows a lot.
Yeah, so that's what's funny about this is this film is set in 1912, and just a couple of months after the sinking of the Titanic. So if you go and watch the film Titanic, it basically takes a lot from this movie, including the ending. The ending is it's straight up, like, oh, we're reunited. Yes, we're reunited in death. Yeah. But also, it's just, here's the old woman who is trying to get back to, this event from her youth, and which is how this film starts. And he dies young, just like Jack. And yes, exactly. Jack in Titanic. Richard dies young, just like Jack, although not as young as Jack, and. It is. If you watch Titanic, you watch Somewhere in Time, you're going to see a lot of resonances. So I don't know if what's his name? What's his name? James Cameron. Has James Cameron ever said this was an influence on him? I don't know. Yeah. But we were thinking that Hugh Grant probably. Oh yeah, it's weird watching this and just realizing there are strong Hugh Grant vibes from what Christopher Reeve is doing in the 1912 sequences. Yeah. Again, you just gotta see it to know what we're talking about, but there's definitely something there.
Tonight I'm all alone in my room. I'll go insane if you won't sleep with me. I'll still be with you. I'm gonna meet you on the ice cream plane. The ice cream plane before dark at night. The ice cream plane, or I'll go insane. Well, I don't see.
So that was Somewhere in Time, starring Christopher Reeve, Jane Seymour, Christopher Plummer, Bill Irwin, and some other people. Directed by Janos Vark, who I guess also directed Jaws 2 and Supergirl. So I think they let him direct out of prison because Jaws 2 actually made a ton of money. Yeah, that's true. So they're like, okay, you can goof around with this art thing. I mean, I'm just saying he's got shall we say, a spotty record.
I'm not a fan of Jaws 2.
Well, are you a fan of any of the Jaws sequels?
No.
And yet we're going to watch them for the show because I haven't watched them.
I know.
Anyway, written by Richard Matheson, as we've gone into great detail.
Yeah.
So you can follow us on social media. We are Mary vs. Movies on Twitter, Mary vs. Movies on Instagram, Mary versus the Movies on Tumblr, Mary vs. Movies at mas.to. And no, I do not have that website up and running yet. Whatever. Let's see. We're on all the major platforms. We are on Stitcher and Spotify, Apple Music. You can rate and review us, and please do that if you would. We are on Google Play, Overcast, all the rest of it. We have a Patreon where you can help support the show. $3 a month will get you some stickers and a button, but it will also get you access to our second podcast, Hollywood Avalon, where we watch Arthurian movies. And that sounds dry, but let me tell you, it's not, because we started off with Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which was awesome, followed by First Night, which was not, and then we watched King Arthur's Court, which is, it's all right. And we will be coming out with our 4th episode pretty soon, which will be on The Knights of the Round Table, which is from the 50s. If
I'm
you...
psyched about that one.
Yeah, me too. If you sign up for our Patreon, you will have access to our other podcast. That comes out once a month. But you'll also be helping to support the show because, as you know, we are not ad-supported. We are not on a network. We are just on our own, and we're paying for this all out of our own pocket otherwise. So, things cost money.
With period-correct coinage.
Yes, please. No groats. No half farthings. Although, actually, if you want to send me some groats or half farthings, I'll take them. I like old coins.
You do.
I do. And, So, next episode, we will be watching the film A Passage to India, which I know is based on an E.M. Forster novel, and I don't know much more than that. So, because I haven't read the novel either. Does that have Judy Davis in it? I don't remember.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so you'll be happy.
I will be.
Though
I never seen it, but
Judy Davis is great.
Yeah.
I know you really like her. Mm-hmm. So, until next time.
See you around, Arthur.